Well, good morning. It really is a pleasure to be with you. Let's take our Bibles over to Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, as we start thinking this morning about the zeal of Moses. John Maxwell is known for writing a lot of different leadership books, but I like one thing that he said just about the book process. You write something and you put it in print and it stays static. But hopefully you continue to grow in your study of that topic, whatever it is. That's how I feel about the book Lifelong Zeal that's been mentioned several times. To be really clear, I don't do this to sell books. In fact, I already told Ben I've sent a whole box of free books to his house. So if you want one, you can just have one. I do this because I care deeply about this subject. It took 3 years for me to go through and to study about this. And I'm thankful for that opportunity. But that just stays in print. I've kept studying this. And in the word book, you'll find that we kind of trace through the life of Peter because the Bible shows us his development and his maturity over several years there with Jesus. And although the book focuses on a lot of different zealous people in the Bible, the one that I never put in there was Moses. And it has been so rewarding for me to go back and look at the life of Moses. We have decades of this man's life recorded for us in Scripture. And we see ourselves in him. We see his ups and his downs, and we can relate to that. And so I want us to be able to study this morning about the life of Moses and his zeal for the Lord, beginning here in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 23. If you were not in class, just by way of review, what we said is that we're looking at this verse in Titus 2 verse 14, that God has purchased us and purified us and taken possession of us to be zealous for good deeds. He desires this quality in us. And so for all of us that are children of God, that have been redeemed by Christ's blood, have had our sins washed away in the waters of baptism, that belong to his family, we're supposed to be a people of zeal. And as we look here in Hebrews chapter 11, we see that Moses is an excellent example of this. Begin reading with me in verse 23. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. And by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasure of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. And by faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. And by faith they passed through the Red Sea, as though they were passing through dry land. And the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Now, I understand that the Hebrews writer here is picking out milestones from Moses' life that demonstrate his trust and reliance in God, his great faith. But each of these sections also demonstrate this wonderful zeal of Moses. So let's start here thinking about his parents. Did you notice in verse 23 and verse 24 that these are not just anybody's parents? These are the kind of God-fearing, God-loving people that distinguish themselves and stand out from the crowd. When others, heartbreakingly, would have had their children ripped from their arms by Pharaoh's soldiers, the parents of Moses had come up with a plan. They'd kind of gone the second mile to find out, how are we going to protect this baby? The parents of Moses were not afraid of the king's edict. There was that courage in them to put their trust in God. How blessed is Moses to grow up exposed to parents like that? Look, there were probably some among the Israelites that sacrificed their lives, that would not give up their children. And Pharaoh's soldiers took their own lives as they came to take and seize their children. There were bold servants of God. But even among those other servants of God, Moses' parents stand out. Let me make a challenge to the parents here this morning. I think your kids need to see your zeal. They need to see that you have a burning desire to please God. As was referenced at the table, that Jesus prayed in the garden, not my will, but thine be done. Could your kids say that in your family, in your household, that's the way mom and dad make decisions? Not serving ourselves, but putting the will of God first. Moses is raised by some very zealous parents. Look in verse 23 again. When he was born, he was hidden for 3 months. We know what it's like to keep a kid quiet for 35 minutes during a lesson, much less 3 months. They are willing to do what it takes to protect this young man. And he's exposed to that zeal from a very early age. Are you going that second mile? Not only further than like the pagans and the worldly people like Pharaoh was dealing with, but even that second mile to go further than other parents who know and serve God, to make sure that your kids see your desire to please him. I'm impressed by these parents. And so they get him off to a pretty good start. But if you'll come back to Exodus chapter 3 with me, actually Exodus chapter 2, we can start following through the life of Moses, and we see that he has his highs and lows, like we've already referenced. Look with me at Exodus chapter 2, beginning in verse 12. We see one very rash thing that he's doing. Exodus chapter 2 and verse 12 says, so he looked this way and that. And when he saw that there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. What about Moses' zeal? Well, here he has a sense of justice and what's right and what's good and what's fair. And so he looks over here, he looks over there, and he commits murder. Now, a big hint to the teenagers in the room, if you have to look around and see who's watching, you probably should not do whatever you're considering doing. All right? Moses, he cares about justice. He cares about what's right. But see, it's still unrefined. It's rash. He takes it upon himself and ends up committing murder rather than actually delivering God's people according to God's plan. So this is really a low point for him. This is like Peter jumping up and wanting to walk on water but beginning to sink. Or being on the Mount of Transfiguration but then saying we're going to build 3 different tabernacles. Moses is just getting started and he doesn't have it all figured out yet. But what's great about him is his sense of caring for others is not diminished as the chapter continues. Come on to chapter 2 and verse 15 down to verse 17. Of course, he has to flee. He has to run from Pharaoh. We come to verse 15. When Pharaoh heard of the matter, he tried to kill Moses. Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Can't you just imagine these stair-step 7 girls? And Moses has sat down, and here comes some guys again. They're just going to push him out of the way. All the work they've done to draw up gallon after gallon after gallon of water for their father's flock. These men are just going to move in and take advantage of the situation. Now, instead of being rash, Moses starts to really serve. And that courage is there to defend people that he just met because he has this sense of what really is right. We've got these highs and these lows, just like with Peter. Look over at chapter 3. You know this one, don't you? Chapter 3, if you want to think about starting a spiritual fire, you're not going to do much better than a burning bush. He comes and literally hears God speak from a burning bush. Verse 2, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in the blazing fire from the midst of the bush, and looked, behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. So Moses said, I must turn aside now and see this marvelous sight, why the bush is not burned up. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, here I am. And he said, do not come near here. Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. Now, I have looked forward and backwards. If I've missed it and you found it, grab me after services. But I can't find anywhere that the Bible actually says directly that he stopped, took his sandals off, and was reverent before God. But I think that is exactly what the text is saying. That he's told, you can't come here. This is holy. And as he approaches the Lord, as he listens to the Lord, he is showing great respect and great reverence here. That's a high point for him. So he listens and he finds out about this mission that God has for him. And yet we know in chapter 4 that he begins to make excuses. Verse 1, Moses said, "What if they will not believe me or listen to what I say? They may say the Lord has not appeared to you." God seems to take Moses' first question as a valid concern. What if they won't listen to him? Okay, Moses, here's what I'll do. You'll be able to do this miracle, number 1. You'll be able to do this miracle, number 2. Let me show you my power now. That should settle it. But verse 10, after God has performed 2 miracles right there before Moses, Moses says to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither recently nor in time past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue." And the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth? Or who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I, even I will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to say." Now, again, God does really great. Okay, Moses, consider it, but I'm going to be with you. Verse 13, here's the problem. But Moses said, "Please, Lord, now send the message by whomever you will." And the anger of the Lord burned against Moses. He said, "Is there not your brother Aaron the Levite? I know that he speaks fluently. Moreover, behold, he's coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You are to speak to him and put the words in his mouth, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and his mouth, and I will teach you what you are to do." God is going to get Moses moving because he's hesitating and he's making excuses. You know why I need to see that? Because I hesitate and I make excuses. And so do you. We read in the scriptures the kind of stewards we're supposed to be of our finances, and yet we get awfully interested in something at Home Depot or Best Buy or Hobby Lobby, okay? We read what God says about nourishing ourselves not on bread alone but on his word. And yet our Bible stays closed in the middle of the week. And we hesitate. And we know the importance of raising our children in the fear and the instruction of the Lord. And yet we're timid and we let them conform to this world time and time again. We are just like Moses. We have highs and we have lows. And that's okay, as long as we're willing to learn from those mistakes as we go. The great thing about Peter is he kept on learning. The great thing about Moses is he kept on learning. And when we are tempted to be rash, slow down and look for wisdom. When we're tempted to be hesitant, step forward. And remember that when God is with us, we have nothing to fear. Moses is showing us how zeal matures and is refined in his life. And we need our zeal to mature in that same fashion. What happens next for Moses? Well, he starts using his zeal for God's glory. And did you notice when we read from Hebrews that there were 2 key events? The Hebrews writer said, if you don't remember anything else about Moses, you have to know these. And I'm kind of surprised by that, because if I had been the Hebrews writer, I would have wanted to say, for 40 years, he put up with grumbling, mumbling, ungrateful followers. And for 40, you would think that would make the highlight reel. It doesn't. There's so many things in his life that are not mentioned, but Hebrews says, if you want to know this man, know these 2. So let's stop and read them. Exodus chapter 12. Think about the zeal that it took for Moses to help the Israelites observe the Passover. Exodus chapter 12, let's begin reading in verse 11. "Now you shall eat it in this manner, with your loins girded, and your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. And you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be a sign for you on your houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Now this day will be a memorial to you, and you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you are to celebrate it as a permanent ordinance. He goes on through the rest of the chapter to give a tremendous amount of detail for how this Passover is to be observed, right? We learn about the exact animal. We learn the time of day. We learn that they have to eat it quickly. We learn what they have to do with the blood. We learn how they have to be dressed and have their staff in their hand. There's a ton of detail here. How would you communicate that to 600,000 people with no group texting? How are you going to get that message out? He did not post this on Instagram. He has to get a lot of really, really specific details distributed through a network of slaves because their life depends on it. It takes zeal to get this job done, just to inform people what God expects. And you say, but Phillip, come on. I mean, once they found out that their life depended on it, they would pay attention. I mean, the cost, the stakes are just too high. Of course, they would really want. We have a message of eternal salvation, of rescue from hell. And far more than our life on this earth depends on it. But people don't always listen. But we have more opportunities to get that message out and more tools to help us get that message out than Moses did. And if Moses could get that message out to hundreds of thousands of people, what excuse would we make? I think we already learned God doesn't want our excuses. God is looking for our zeal. Moses has tremendous zeal in helping the people observe the Passover. But secondly, come to Exodus chapter 14. As he is using his zeal for the good of the people and for the glory of God, we see him speak up boldly here at the Red Sea. Chapter 14 and verse 13. Moses has said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." Come to verse 21. So then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, so the waters were divided. Let's stop there for a second. My kids love the movie Prince of Egypt, right? They love the music. They love to see the special effects, to think about God's deliverance of his people. But whether you're talking about the Prince of Egypt or Charlton Heston or whatever, most of the movies put the attention on Moses, don't they? That Moses is this great deliverer, that Moses is this great hero. That's not where Exodus puts the attention. We already saw in verse 13 and verse 14, you keep silent, the Lord will fight for you. Verse 21, the Lord swept the sea back. One of the greatest things about the zeal of Moses is that he knows who belongs in the spotlight, and it's not him. He wants God to get the credit for this miracle. So look what happens in verse 30 and 31. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord. And who's last? And in his servant Moses. The truth is, if you'll be a zealous Christian, you'll go out there with a burning desire to please God and start engaging in these good deeds that God has prepared for us, people will notice you. You will have a reputation. But the question is, will your reputation be for your own glory? Or will everybody say, that's the kind of woman, that's the kind of man that keeps the spotlight on the Lord? I love how Moses over and over and over emphasizes that it's God who saves. And we have a responsibility to lift up and to boast in the cross of Christ, that he would be the one that receives the glory, even when we are serving with great zeal. So if you just come this far in his life, Moses seems like a poster child, right? He's gotten over his mistakes. He's learned from them. He's served in these tremendous ways. But you need to keep going and see that Moses is still just like us because he struggles with burnout. Can I use another basketball example? You get a basketball, you fill that sucker up with compressed air, and you know what it's made to do? It's made to hit something really hard and bounce back. And in a lot of ways, God has made each one of us that way. We are made to come up against some hard things in life and bounce back. So your boss requires you to pull an all-nighter, you work super hard, but then you rest in a couple days and you bounce back. You get sick and you're down with a fever for a few days, but you get over it and you bounce back. You know what burnout is? Burnout is a deflated basketball. When you drop it and it just thuds. And it's not bouncing back because something inside is missing. I want to talk to you this morning if you feel that way. If you feel burnt out, exhausted, burdened, just at the end of your rope. Number one, you're in good company. Because wimps and quitters, they give up way before they ever get burnt out. They're like, yeah, I'm not even touching that. If you're facing burnout, first, it's probably because you are deeply devoted to serving God. So you're in great company. Elijah was burnt out. Paul got burnt out. Moses gets burnt. You're in good company. But just like with that basketball, we know that we have to put compressed air back in it. We have to fill it back up. You have to find those things of God that fill you back up. My wife and I are different in the way that we think. I'm the extrovert. I am filled up with people. Let me bounce some ideas off somebody, discuss how we're going to help this person, discuss what our goals are going to be, or our next challenges, and I am all pumped up. She needs the Psalms by herself on her Kindle. Like, let her be quiet. She'll go teach, she'll go serve, but let her regroup. She reinflates when she has that time to herself, right? To collect herself and regroup. We all face burnout if we're going to be serious about serving the Lord. But in Exodus chapter 18, we get some really awesome information about how to start overcoming that, how to kind of reinflate so that we can bounce back from those hard days. Begin reading with me in chapter 18, verse 13. The Bible says to us, "It came about the next day that Moses set to judge the people. And the people stood about Moses from the morning until the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, 'What is this thing that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone as judge? All the people stand about you from morning until evening.' So Moses said to his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, it comes to me, and I judge between a man and his neighbor and make known the statutes of God and his laws.' But Moses' father-in-law said to him, 'The thing that you are doing is not good. You will surely wear out both yourself and these people who are with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone.'" Remember how we talked about in class that zeal can be a win-win-win? It's good for us. It glorifies God. It shines a brighter light to the lost. What Jethro says is, Moses, you're in a lose-lose. You're getting exhausted, and the line to come and get your help is out the door and around the building. Like it's so long, they're getting exhausted too. You got to make a change, Moses. And so, of course, in verse 19 to the end of the chapter, he begins describing the system of trusting other people. Sometimes we get into this position where we think we're the only one that can really apply these principles biblically. We're the only one that really can solve this problem or answer this question, and we need a really big slice of humble pie that says, you know what, the people around are perfectly intelligent human beings, and if we just give them the Word of God, they can use it for themselves too. And we might give them some training and some direction. You can see as he goes down, look what kind of men he's looking for. Verse 21, "Select out of the people able men who fear God, men of truth who hate dishonest gain, and you shall place these over them as leaders of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let them judge the people at all time." Moses needed the humility to say, you know what, somebody else, they might even do the job better than I would do it. One of the great blessings of working with the Embry Hills congregation is that we have like 26 deacons. And consistently, the deacons do things much better than I would do them if I was doing them alone. I could do it, but they can do it better. And I need to step back, and I need to be really good at being the evangelist, and they need to be really good at the areas that they have been entrusted with by the shepherds. Like Moses, we all struggle with burnout. We need to pass some things over to others on our team and really trust them. Let's go one more. Not only does Moses need to learn how to overcome this burnout just like us, but Moses also takes the time to really help Joshua come along after him. We can look here at chapter 33 and verse 11. This mentions Joshua just briefly. If we've studied the scriptures before from the life of Joshua, we know that he's been with Moses for a long time. In verse 11, we see that when Moses would return to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. If you're taking notes, you might just write something down. Numbers chapter 11, verse 29. I love that story. Numbers 11:29. You've got Joshua and Moses observing the same situation. And Joshua observes it kind of on a surface, immature level. And Moses gets to the heart of the situation. And he teaches Joshua to see it from its heart. That's what a great mentor does. A great mentor looks at the same thing we see, but they see a little bit deeper. They see a little bit more. They know what God's will is, and they seek God's will to be done. Numbers 11, verse 29. That's the kind of man that Moses was helping. And that's what we need to be doing, looking for someone else coming up behind us. If you're 10, look for a 7-year-old. If you're 17, look for a 12-year-old. Right? If you're 35, go find a 25-year-old. But there are people coming behind you that you can build up. And Moses' zeal is not complete until he's passing that baton until the next generation. Okay. Sometimes preachers do lessons where the whole lesson is so that they can actually make one point they really care about. The point that is the whole reason this lesson exists. Exodus 33. I'll try to get through it. Verse 12. Exodus 33, verse 12. So the reason for this study is that people don't stay in the burnt out section, right? Because with Moses, his zeal is inseparable from his nearness to God. Okay? Inseparable. What we're going to read here in the rest of chapter 33 is the high point in Moses' life. You think hearing God speak to you from a burning bush is good, but this chapter is better. And the name of this study is not Zeal in Your 20s. The name of this study is Lifelong Zeal. And what we're reading in chapter 33 is Moses towards the end of his life, as committed, as refined, as devoted as you are going to see him. Look with me at verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I've known you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I may know you, that I may find favor in your sight." Pause there. What Moses is consumed by is, God, I've been walking with you, but if I could ask, let me know your ways that I may know you. In the history of the world, Moses is in the top 10 of people who know God, but he wants to know God more. He wants to know the ways of the Lord for every decision in his life. That is beautiful. Not only does he want to know God and know his ways, look how he continues, verse 13, consider too that this nation is your people. So he said, my presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if your presence does not go with us, then do not lead us up from here. How can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us that we, I and your people, may be distinguished from all the other people who are upon the face of the earth? Not only does Moses want to know God and know his ways, Moses wants to say, people can tell we're different. We're distinguished. We're a people that are absolutely committed to keeping your commands in a way that please you. Friends, there may be some things that we can borrow from the community church down the street about the way they do their Facebook page or something like that, but we're not trying to be like them. We're trying to be the distinct, peculiar, zealous people of God. We are trying to stand out as the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And Moses says, I'm not taking another step unless you help me be different. We're not made to fit in. We're made to shine. And Moses wants to be different. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. Don't be hesitant to speak up about what makes us different when that is things that we are willing to do to submit ourselves to the will of God. Moses' zeal is drawing him closer to know God and to be his people. Verse 17, the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken. For you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. So Moses says, I pray you, show me your glory. And he said, I myself will make all of my goodness pass before you, will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. And he said, but you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. It will come about while my glory is passing by. I will put you in the cleft of the rock, cover you with my hand until I've passed. And then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Moses wants to know God. Moses wants to be with the people of God. And Moses wants to see the glory of God. And that's why I say this is the high point of Moses' life. He is going to see God's glory. But friends, he is going to see God's glory momentarily from a crack in a rock from behind. And Jesus has promised we can spend eternity in the full presence of God. I want to see his glory. Isn't that what you want? To see his glory, not for a moment, not from behind, but to be with him forever in his presence. This is lifelong zeal. This is someone with this burning desire to be nearer and nearer and nearer to God. And so how does he meet God at the end of his life? We see in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 1 through 7, that he meets God as a friend. Deuteronomy chapter 34. Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pigish, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead, as far as Dan, and all of Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, chapter 34, verse 2, and all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, and the Negev and the plain in the valley of Jericho, the city of palm tree as far as Zor. And the Lord said to him, this is the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor. But no man knows his burial place to this day. And although Moses was 120 years old when he died, his eye was not dim, nor his vigor abated. He served with lifelong zeal. Friends, the great thing about stirring up this spiritual fire is that when we end this life, It's not extinguished. We're just taken into his presence to shine onward and onward and onward forevermore to his glory. And so the question today is that what you're going to live for? Are you going to aim to please God in all that you say and all that you do? What we've learned from Titus chapter 2 is that because of his grace, he is willing to purchase us and purify us and take possession of us, that we could be his special people, zealous for good deeds. Won't you let his sacrifice on the cross pay for your sins, wash them away, and adopt you into his family this morning? If you're ready to commit to walk with the Lord, please come forward as we stand and sing.